Hello students, welcome to Unit 6, Developmental Psychology. For this unit we will be reading out of Chapter 4, so make sure you're paying attention to the reading. And also as a quick reminder, make sure you're using the unit outline to your advantage. But in this unit we will be focusing on development through the lifespan. So we're talking about physical development, cognitive development, emotional, moral development. But for this unit, Unit 6.1, we're going to be focusing on prenatal development as well as physical development. All right, but first, before we begin, what is developmental psychology? Developmental psychology is the branch of psychology that studies physical, cognitive, and social changes throughout the lifespan. Okay. Remember, cognition is mental processing, thinking, understanding, memorizing. That's all cognition. And then we have social development, and we'll talk about the different sub-branches of that later on. So for this unit, we're going to be focusing on prenatal development, which is development in the womb when you're still a fetus, an embryo, and then also we're going to move on to physical development. All right, so Unit 6.1, as we said, we're going to be focusing on prenatal and physical development. So where to begin with prenatal and physical development? Where we should begin, with the beginning of life, conception. Here we see a woman's egg, also known as an ovum, that's the scientific term there, plus the sperm cells, which equals a zygote upon fertilization. Once the sperm fertilizes the egg, it's known as a zygote, which is a single human cell. So here we see more intricate images of that process. Here in blue, in this image, on the top left, we see blue sperm cells fertilizing the ovum. Here we see a single sperm cell, and there's that same cell entering the ovum, fertilizing the ovum. And here's a graphic of what takes place after the sperm cell enters the ovum and fertilizes the egg. And that is what leads us to the first stage of development, which is called the germinal stage. I know it says zygote there, but zygote is when we are just a single cell, and then that single cell begins to cleavage or divide into many other cells, into hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of cells as we develop. All right. So why do we call the germinal stage also the zygotic stage? Well, it's because we begin as a zygote, a fertilized egg, also known as an ovum. All right. The germinal stage lasts for about 2 weeks after conception, and the reason that it doesn't last very long, it's because it's a very brief period of rapid cell division, as you can see in the graphic below. This zygote in the germinal stage will develop into an embryo, which transitions us to the embryonic stage. It's called the embryonic stage because we are an embryo at this point. It begins 2 weeks after conception and lasts until the 3rd month of pregnancy. All right, so about the beginning of the 2nd trimester, if you will. All right, so the embryonic stage is from the 2nd week after conception to the beginning of the 2nd trimester. Okay, so here we can see the beginning of the embryonic stage here at 13 days. And then it will end around this period, 41 days, where we transition into the fetal stage. The last and the 3rd and final stage of the prenatal development is known as the fetal stage. At this point, all human beings, we are fetuses, no longer embryos. And this is the stage you will remain in until birth. All right, this will last throughout the 2nd and 3rd trimesters. All right, it's 9 weeks after conception all the way until birth is the duration of the fetal stage. During this stage, amniocentesis can be performed. And this is the process where if you have any concerns about the health of your fetus, if you have any concerns about the condition of your fetus, you can perform what's called amniocentesis, which is pictured here. What happens is a needle is injected into the womb, and it extracts fetal fluid, and that fluid is then tested for any genetic abnormalities, to test for Down syndrome or to test for any other physical or mental ailments that the child might experience after birth. It is an optional procedure. It's very, very rarely performed because of its high risk. As you can see, a needle is very close to the fetus during this procedure, so it's a very rare procedure, but it can be performed in case there is any concern over the health of the fetus. One of the many concerns concerning fetal health and fetal well-being during the prenatal development stages are called teratogens. Teratogens are agents such as viruses and other harmful chemicals that can reach the embryo or fetus during prenatal development and can cause harm to the embryo or fetus. For one of the best examples of a teratogen is known as fetal alcohol syndrome, or FAS, which leads to growth and mental retardation, facial deformities, and cardiac problems. Here pictured below is a picture of a normal child's brain compared with the child's brain whose mother drank alcohol while pregnant, which led to fetal alcohol syndrome and mental and physical retardation. So here again are all of the stages of prenatal development. We start in the in the germinal stage, where we begin as a zygote, a single cell, followed by 2 weeks of rapid cell division, which then transitions us into the embryonic stage, which lasts from about 2 weeks after conception up to about 8 to 9 weeks after conception. So about 6 to 8 weeks, somewhere in there. And in that stage, that's where we're starting to develop our organs, developing our neural networks in the brain, developing limbs, and it's where we begin the process of appearing human. Because if you look at the earlier stages, we look like some kind of worm or fish. And then that transitions us into the last 2 trimesters, which is the last 6 months of pregnancy, which is the fetal stage. And here we start to develop all of those human characteristics that make us human, like eyes, ears, nose, hair, fingers, toes, all that good stuff. All right, so now that we have reached the final stage of the prenatal development, we are now born. Okay, now let's begin talking about all the many characteristics of physical development from birth towards the end of life. All right, so as a newborn, we begin life with, some might call it knowledge, but really they're reflexes. Newborns are born with innate reflexes that facilitate their survival. Most human beings are born with these reflexes. For example, the most significant is probably the rooting reflex. So if you touch a baby, which is pictured here below, if you touch a baby or rub a baby's cheek, that baby will automatically turn his or her head toward the touch. They will then open their mouth in search of sustenance for breastfeeding. Another famous reflex is the Babinski reflex. Now that's just fun to say. Babinski. That's a fun one to say. The Babinski reflex is when the bottom of the foot is stroked, the toes fan outward as if to grab onto something. Then there's the Moro reflex, which is the sensation of falling. When a baby feels like it's falling, it'll stick his arms and legs out in an attempt to grab onto something. And then the walking reflex. If you actually hold a toddler or infant, hold them above the ground and place their feet on the ground as you hold them, they will begin to start walking or seemingly walk as the reflex in their legs will kick in, and their genetic predisposition to walk will begin to take over. Now, they can't walk at this point in life, but they still have that reflex too. Newborns, we're going to dive a little bit into cognitive development here, but newborns prefer to look at faces, studies have found. After they were shown the image below, it was discovered that newborns spent significantly more time looking at the correct face as opposed to the other 2 alternatives. This scientific data, this empirical data, seems to show that newborns prefer looking at faces. They prefer or tend to have a genetic predisposition to prefer to look at faces and to have social interaction with other people. So other concepts related to physical development is maturation. This refers to biological growth processes that enable orderly changes in behavior. It's relatively uninfluenced by experience. This is typically a natural or genetic predisposition phenomenon. So an example of maturation, it's simply a step-by-step process in physical development. So a child will begin crawling, and then the child begins standing, and then the child will begin walking slowly, and then the child will begin to run as they physically develop. This is what we're referring to as maturation. So an infant, when they're only a few months old, they might roll over, and then they'll start crawling, and then from crawling they begin to stand, and then to walk. The maturation is the biological, natural physical development characteristics and all the skills that we develop naturally as our body develops. Adolescence. You might see this word used quite often in this unit, especially on exams and quizzes and other activities we do in class. Adolescence is referring to teenagers, essentially. So pre-adolescence refers to children who have not yet reached puberty. Adolescence refers to children who have reached puberty. When children do reach this age, they begin to become interested in sexual activity. All right, so let's talk about that very briefly. They become interested sometimes in primary sex characteristics. However, this is usually not the case for early adolescence. Primary sex characteristics are the sex characteristics that are directly involved in reproduction. So we're talking about the penis, we're talking about vagina, testicles, we're talking about all the parts involved in reproduction. Secondary sex characteristics are the secondary parts that can attract one person to another. So like a man's lower voice or a man's height might attract a female, or a female's curves or her high-pitched voice and sweet demeanor might attract a male. Those are secondary sex characteristics. Now, adolescence typically begins around the age of 13. This is when the average teenager reaches puberty. However, take note of this, that females reach puberty much faster than males. Females actually tend to develop faster than males in all categories. They develop faster physically, cognitively, in terms of maturity. Females typically develop much faster than boys. Ask me about this and we'll talk about this in more detail in class. So as we said, adolescence is the transition from childhood to adulthood, extending from puberty to independence. All right, so probably independence would be in your 20s. And then puberty is the period of sexual maturation during which a person becomes capable of reproduction. It usually begins, as we said, around ages 12 to 13. So physical development, as we develop from adolescence into adulthood, that can lead to menopause, which is where a woman will no longer experience her monthly period. This can lead to psychological changes as well as physical changes. We'll talk about that more in class. Sensory abilities tend to diminish as we age. Our sense of taste, our sense of sound, our eyesight all diminishes as we age into adulthood. Our susceptibility to illness, our immune system declines, and our susceptibility to illness increases as we age into adulthood. The risk of dementia is much greater as an older adult. Dementia oftentimes refers to the decline in mental ability. Now, this can be severe enough that an adult will start to lose memory, will start to get vertigo and become dizzy. Dementia can be pretty severe. Oftentimes, dementia can lead to Alzheimer's disease, which, as we discussed, is caused by the degeneration of acetylcholine, which is a progressive and irreversible brain disorder characterized by gradual deterioration of memory, reasoning, language, and finally physical function. All right, and that's going to end it for us today, and I'll see you guys next time.